Well, not surprisingly, Descartes would not be driven, to reject his argument based on, my explanation of how a finite, a being that does not have infinite formal reality can create an idea that has infinite objective reality. In other words, how I could create the concept of God. And, he claims that what I have just described is absolutely impossible. And here's what he writes. The perception of the infinite somehow exists in me prior to the perception of the finite. That is, the perception of God exists, and I suppose it's the idea of God, prior to the perception of myself. Why would I know that I doubt and desire, that is, that I lack something, and that I am not wholly perfect, if there were no idea in me of a more perfect being by comparison with which I might acknowledge my defects? In other words, Descartes seems to be saying that I can't create the idea of God in the way that I just did, because the only way I could is, I don't have this idea of lacking, or the only way I could have this idea of lacking would be if I already had the idea of something that was infinite. And as a result, Descartes claiming it's impossible for anyone to have a concept of a limited substance unless he already had the concept of an unlimited substance. He seems to be saying that you can't recognize that you're less than omnipotent, less than omniscient, less than omnibenevolent, unless you already have the concept of God as omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, that you can't create it in the way that I just suggested. Now, the big question, which I'm going to leave to you guys, is he actually right about this? That I'm going to leave for you. I personally am not sure that he is correct, but it's something that requires further examination, and I'm going to leave it to you to think about. But there's another thing to think about. Even if you think this argument works, go back to CPI 3 or Premise 2. Remember, as of the beginning of this meditation, Meditation 3, we're worried about an evil genius making us believe all things that are false. Now, we found out certain things he can't deceive us about. Our existence, that we're a thinking thing, the contents of our minds. However, this argument for God's existence requires that this metaphysical principle, the causal principle of ideas. How do you know that? Perhaps that's something that the evil genius is deceiving you about. And this spurs many, many, many discussions of Descartes' version of the cosmological argument. Back and forth discussions have happened. And in general, it's very, very difficult part of Descartes' philosophy. However, if we're thinking about knowledge, we might not be in such bad shape for a very simple reason. We're now going to have to turn to the fifth meditation, because this isn't the only proof that he gives for God's existence. He has another proof for God's existence. Maybe that one works a little bit better than this one and will help Descartes secure his knowledge of the external world.